Greetings gamers, my name's Anto and I've been playing tabletop games for over 20 years now, and in this video I want to talk to you about the 2024 Revised 5th Edition Dungeon Master's Guide. This video is sponsored by Chepeku Maps, more on them later. Now right from the jump, Wizards of the Coast didn't send me a copy of the DMG, they're not paying me to say any of this, so you're just going to get my raw, fairly filtered thoughts. I have a lot of thoughts, and to stop myself doing old man yells at cloud, I have structured them a little bit, so we're going to go through that structure, starting off with the good, because I've got a lot to say about the not good, so I want to start with the good. Balance. So in the lead-up marketing for this book, a lot of emphasis was put on how Wizards of the Coast wanted this to be a practical tome for dungeon mastering, and for the most part, they have really succeeded with this. The headline for the book is that, for the most part, I really do like it. It is a big improvement in a lot of ways over the 2014 5th edition DMG, but it's not without its problems. In terms of being a practical tome for dungeon masters, it succeeds pretty well. There are a lot of really useful little practical tips sprinkled all throughout the books. Things like advice on tracking monster hit points in combat, with a couple different examples on whether you count down monster HP or you count up to monster HP to figure out when it is that they're going to die. Little things like that, which seem super obvious to you if you've been a dungeon master for a long time, but are really useful little tips for new DMs that they would previously have picked up online in videos like this one or in forums and stuff. Having those baked into the book is a really good thing. I've seen in some of the promo interviews, they've talked about how they wanted this book to be the resource that DMs go to when they want to know things, instead of having to rely on so many secondary external sources, and I think for the most part that has been achieved pretty well. For example, there is advice on how to spend your time when preparing a session. This is something that I know from surveys that I've conducted of my audience. Link in the description to my 2024 survey, by the way, if you want to help decide the content that's going to be on the channel for the next year. So I know that how much time to spend on prep and the worry of over or under prepping is a big concern that dungeon masters have. My issue with the advice given in the book is it's very focused on pre-written adventure modules. It would kind of work for some homebrew stuff, but not nearly as easy as for pre-written stuff. A lot of the assumptions made in that section are built around you having a module to read before you head into this. The broad concepts of what they talk about in this section will still be useful if you're building your own encounters, building your own adventures, doing a homebrew thing, but it won't be nearly as step-by-step practically appropriate. The tracking sheets that they've talked so much about are, again, a really welcome addition. Some of them are significantly better than others. The campaign conflicts sheet, for example, is wildly underbaked. It might as well just be a piece of notepaper. I don't understand how it made it through the approval stages. But other sheets within the selection that are within this book are really good. Things like the expectation sheet are basically a session 0 checklist, or the player sheet that the DM uses to keep track of a player character's motivations, their relationships, all that kind of stuff. Those kind of sheets, really useful. I could totally see a new DM printing off a whole bunch of those, putting them in a binder and using them really successfully. Which brings us to another great thing about this book. It is full of genuinely useful tips. A couple of my favorites. There's a section talking about how to introduce, and more importantly, how to track the house rules that you have put into your games. Talks about implementing house rules and then how to keep a track of them so that you can remember which house rules you've implemented. Really great practical advice. Probably my favorite sidebar in the entire book is about the players exploiting the rules. It talks about setting clear expectations with your players and then breaks it down into a few bullet points that a new GM could use to give to their players to kind of legitimize them when they say, hey, you are breaking the rules right now. Things like advice on players breaking the economy, advice on the players trying to set up a mile of peasants to pass a spear to each other that breaks the speed of light because of the 6-second action economy. Putting in place in black and white fundamentals such as the game is not an economy, the game is not a physics engine, gives a backing to new GMs to say to those problem players, hey, look, what you're doing is a problem. Here's where it talks about it in the rules. And those kind of practical, useful tips are what I'm all about on this channel. So if you're new here and you want to get tons more practical tips for being a game master or building out homebrew worlds, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. The other thing that I like about the 2024 Revised 5th Edition Dungeon Master's Guide is that it has a bunch of improved content over the 2014 version. There is actually Session 0 advice in here now. I was critical of the Player's Handbook for how lax it was with its Session 0 talk, but it seems like all of the substantial stuff has been moved into the DMG, which makes a lot of sense. So I rescind most of my negative comments about the Session 0 stuff being in the Revised Player's Handbook. The book has got improved sections on exploration and roleplay, and those sections are more developed than they were in 2014. For example, there's a whole section talking about roleplay encounters and how to incorporate your non-charisma based characters into the roleplay in a way that feels natural and gets them to use the things that they are good at and allows them to shine in a situation where they might not feel like they should be shining because they don't have a high charisma. There's an expanded section on travel, which is really nice. The weather system that they put in the book is still just kind of a mess and kind of confusing. It's a bunch of tables that talk about varying your temperatures up or down based on kind of like the average temperature. It would have been much better to just use something like this, which is a hex table from the OSR subreddit. It's one of the most kind of clean and easy to parse weather tables that I've ever seen, and I use it every single week in my games. And then the last way that the book is really improved on 2014 is it's just got a lot more examples of things. So there's a whole section of sample adventures. These are kind of page long adventures that are short, punchy, just give you the core information that you need to get your brain running. And I would actually love to see Wizards of the Coast publish a lot more of these. Like a book with just a few hundred of these would be an instant bestseller on every DM's shelf, I think. Similarly, there is a list of suggested plot hooks by tier of play. Incredibly useful if you're a first-time GM and you're struggling to think, well, what kinds of stories do we want to be telling at each of the power levels? You just turn to these. Then the lore glossary, which is a new edition, is really welcome. There's a lot of history to D&D. It's 50 years old this year, and there's a lot of assumed knowledge in 2014 especially had a lot of assumed knowledge within its text. So it's nice that WotC are taking this approach that, hey, someone who's never heard of D&D might be picking up this book and reading it, and they might be confused by all of these proper names that we've got absolutely everywhere, so let's explain them to them. And then, like in 2014, there was a selection of maps, and the maps in there are broadly fine, perfectly good to get you started. But if you really want to up your map game and get the absolute best looking maps available, you're going to want to check out today's sponsor, Chepeku. Chepeku are the beloved makers of hand-drawn battle maps, and they have literally thousands of options for you to be able to choose from. I use Chepeku maps every single week. For every session, first place I go is to the Chepeku map browser to look for maps that will be suitable for whatever adventure I'm running that week, and then I head over to their Patreon, pick up either the static map, or at the higher tiers you can get animated battle maps that will plug straight into the likes of Foundry VTT, and this is what I use. I just load in one of those maps and I've got something good to go with all the walls, all the lighting, all the special effects already baked in, and I have to do basically no work to do it. By supporting Chepeku over on Patreon, you get access to thousands of battle maps, and there's no easier way to instantly elevate the visuals of your virtual tabletop games. So head to the link down in the description below to check them out, and thanks again to Chepeku for supporting the channel. Okay, so my broad good points about the book aside, keeping in mind that for the most part, I really like it. I think it's improvement on 2014. We need to start talking about the bad stuff. And I'm going to temper myself here and try and keep this from devolving into like a 45-minute rant, because I could rant about this all day.
I can do this all day.
I was really hoping that this book would go part of the way to fixing some of the core underlying math problems that 5th edition has. It does not. In a lot of ways, it makes them worse, and I don't understand why. No, actually, that's not true. I understand why. It makes them worse for the sake of simplicity. So let's talk about it. Right off the bat, the most important thing, if you take nothing else away from this video, it will be this. The way the DMG tells you to reward players with magic items is wrong. I know, bold statement, calling the writers of the game wrong, but they just are. So to contextualize my problem with this, we need to understand a couple basic things first. So the rules say that to level up, you get XP, and it gives you your brackets of XP to level up. To get that XP, you go through encounters. Those encounters are broken down into difficulty tiers, so low, medium, difficult, etc. And the new DMG doesn't give any guidance for how many encounters that you should be having in a day. There's no, 6 to 8 medium encounters is kind of your daily goal. The daily XP threshold is gone. It's just you have your level advancement, you have the XP you get per encounters. So you can take those two numbers, figure out using medium encounters, how many medium encounters will it take to go between levels 1 and 2, 2 and 3, 3 and 4, etc. And then you take that and divide it by the number of encounters that you have in a session, 3 or 4, 1 or 2, whatever the number is. And that gives you the number of sessions it takes you to go between levels. It will give you an approximate number of sessions your entire campaign is going to last. Whole bunch of behind the scenes math. Basically, if you want to run a game in which you go from level 1 to 2 in a single session and then advance up in a typical D&D's kind of standard advancement fashion, you are going to be running about 4 medium encounters per day. That much XP's worth of value per day. That means a typical level 1 to 20 campaign is going to take you about 129, 130 sessions. Then we look at the treasure hoard table in the awarding treasure section of running an adventure, and that suggests that you roll on this table every single session. Not every adventure, not once per level, not X times per level, once every session, which means on average, if you do that in a standard game where you're having about 4 encounters per session, you will end up with 318 magic items across your entire party on average. The DMG suggests that across your entire party, they should end up with 100 magic items over the course of a level 1 to 20 campaign. So you get literally hundreds more magic items than the rules say that you should if you follow the rules. Even if you up that to 8 encounters a day, which very, very few people are getting through 8 encounters in a single session, that still puts you at about 160 items over the course of your 20 levels worth of campaign. So you're still way over spec. And this, I think, is going to create a problem which we're going to see people complain about for the next 10 years without understanding why. So player characters, by and large, in the 2024 PHP have gotten a little bit more powerful. Add on to that, now the official encounter suggestion rules for awarding them magic items that, again, will make them more powerful than they otherwise would be, are way overtuned. And if you are only running 3 or 4 encounters in a session and you're following the XP rewards table and you're playing an XP campaign and then giving out magic items as you should, one of two things is going to happen. Either you're going to tap out your magic item allotment, your 100 items across the entire party by about level 10. That's not a super big problem if you're playing one of the pre-written modules, or if you are someone that only runs up till 10th, 12th level, like the majority of people. But if you want to use the full breadth of the rules that the game provides and that the game suggests that it's built on, you will end up with hundreds too many magic items. Now, a lot of these will probably be potions, common items, lesser things, but once you get up into tier 3, tier 4, you're not going to want to give your players that +1 sword or the uncommon equivalent anymore because they just won't be bothered by it. Their raw natural power will be much greater than it. And I think this is going to result in either tables maxing out their item allotment really quick and then a bunch of DMs come into places like Reddit and being like, I've ended up giving my players too many items, what do I do? Or you'll just keep giving them and they'll be way overpowered, and then we'll have a decade of people complaining that the encounter building rules don't work because the players are way more powerful than they should be because they've got so many more magic items. All that to say, this is an entirely avoidable problem. It's just a problem of maths. Like, all they had to do is decide on their ideal number of encounters per session. That would dictate everything else. Like 6 to 8 encounters per session in the 2014 DMG was ridiculous. But that was an expression of the total daily XP threshold. You could take that total daily XP and it would make 6 to 8 medium encounters. If you ran harder encounters, it would make fewer, but the daily XP was what mattered. And it wasn't broken down by session, it was broken down by like adventuring day, which could span multiple sessions, which meant that if you understood the math, which the 2014 DMG was not good at explaining, I grant that, it was really poorly laid out, really poorly explained. But if you understood that math, it was really easy to make an advancement that worked. The problem I have with this is that the math is just not there, and there is no way to end up with the right amount of magic items over the course of a campaign, regardless of the number of encounters that you run, unless you're running like 9 or 10 encounters per session. So my advice is, if you're running a level 1 to 20 campaign and you're playing on average every week, you're going to take somewhere in the region of sort of 2.5, 3 years with some breaks and stuff. 130 sessions is a relatively good benchmark for where you should be looking for a level 1 to 20 campaign running the whole way through. That sits at about the region that all my level 1 to 20 campaigns have gotten to. If you're doing that, My main suggestion is give a magic item to your players every other session. That gives you a buffer then of about 40 magic items to play with. So some weeks you can double up, some weeks you can give them magic items in between. But you do not want to be rolling on that whole table and giving multiple items every single session. It will cause problems in your game. And if you're not aware of it, you obviously won't understand why the problems have been caused. You followed the rules. Then the last bugbear I have about the math in the game is there is an optional rule. I think it might be the only variant rule in the whole DMG. Most of the variant rules that were in 2014 are gone. This is the optional rule for training to gain levels. You can spend time and gold to gain levels. The problem is, the gold value is ridiculously low. So the design team are constantly talking about how the players are saying they don't have enough things to spend gold on. Yet at tier 4 play, to train up to another level costs only 80 gold. For reference, as per the PHB, the starting gold for a level 17 character is over 20,000. So the gold value in this table is meaningless. So all you've got in the table is time, and depending on the campaign that you're in, time is also meaningless. This is the same table that was in 2014, but again, this would have been a great chance for them to improve some of the underlying math, give players a reason to spend their gold, and give a different option for play. If they'd have made these gold amounts by level and made them much higher, you could have probably run an XP is gold based campaign and sorted out your entire reward system and how you level up into one much more streamlined system that would be easier to understand for a new GM. And to round out today's video, I want to talk about how this book is the lesser son of greater sires.
You are a lesser son of greater sires.
So I've talked about how I do actually like a lot of the things in this book, but most of the things that I like in this book, they're from this book. They're from the 4th edition DMG. And to WotC's credit, in recent interviews, they have admitted that a lot of the stuff that they've brought forward, a lot of the stuff that people have been enjoying about the new DMG, is stuff that's updated from the 4th edition DMG. But my problem is, it takes a lot of stuff from this book, but not all of the best stuff. So as an example, there is a section early on in the book that tells you about different types of players. The role player, the explorer, the instigator, all of these different player archetypes. Taken straight from 4th edition DMG, one of my favourite parts about that book. That I don't so much have a problem with. I don't mind them just pulling forth content from that 4th edition DMG. I've said for years, if they just reprinted everything in this book, but just updated it for 5th edition, I'd be pretty happy. The problem is, a lot of the time, they're pulling forward rulings from 4th edition and making them worse. Great example of this, there are mob rules in the new DMG. They work kind of like the minion rules in 4th edition, except much more complicated. And once you look at the obtuse table that they give you for it and understand what it means, then it kind of becomes easy to run, and I get what they're going with this. Cool. It's just not as simple as minions were, like a 1 hit point creature that's worth 1/4 the XP of whatever the base creature is. Simple, elegant, effective. Just go with it. Most people who have heard of minion rules, who only started in 5th edition and have no 4th edition baggage, really like it. MCDM have built like an entire career off taking 4th edition content, bringing it into the 5th edition sphere. People are ready for 4th edition content. Just give it to them. Don't dress it up as this mob rules that is just needlessly complicated. And we also just don't get some of the really, really good stuff from the 4th edition DMG. So I talked about magic items. We don't get any magic item pricing of substance in the new DMG. We get a table, which is a simplified version of the tables available in the previous DMG and Xanathar's Guide, which is something that's coming up again and again with Revised 5th Edition. They keep bringing forth tables from 2014 and from Xanathar's Guide, stripping elements out of those tables and making them simpler, and then presenting them as new. I've ranted about it at length before, but that's how they handle magic item pricing. I would have loved to see them give every item an individual price. Even if you are a GM who doesn't use magic item pricing and magic items aren't available to go and buy, you just don't use the prices. It's much easier to have a thing and not use it than to not have a thing and want to use it. Another incredible concept from 4th edition that I would love to have seen them bring forward into this DMG was the adventure parcels. So in the 4th edition DMG, there is a whole section about rewarding players, and there is several pages about different parcels of treasure broken down level by level, not tiers, but at individual level. And every level you get 10 parcels of treasure, 4 magic items, and then 6 different parcels of different configurations of treasure amounts of gold, art objects, gems, etc. And if you were running just a straight down the middle standard campaign, all you needed to do was at every level you take those 10 parcels, and that is the total treasure that you give your party over the course of that level. So let's say you want to be really simplified in the way you do it. You say, right, every level is going to be 10 adventures, 10 sessions. Every session, you choose one of these parcels, give it to the players. That is the reward. That is all of the reward that you need to worry about. It's laid out from levels 1 to 30, and it's really simple to understand and to use. Something like that, the 4 pages that takes up, would have been much more useful than the campaign conflicts sheet that was included, or the random table for treasure or hoards. But it's not just the 4th edition DMG that the new DMG lacks in comparison to. In some ways, it is worse than the 2014 book. Like I mentioned, a lot of the tables have been stripped down, simplified to present an easier version to DMs, but what you lose is a lot of depth and, in some cases, a lot of really important information. Like I said, we saw this in the PHP with the starting gold above level 1 table, for example, which broke it all down into one campaign instead of breaking it down into low standard and high magic campaigns. And then things like the monster creation rules in the new DMG are woefully lacking. Hopefully I'll be eating my words in a couple months when much more robust monster creation tools come out in the monster manual. This book references the monster manual a whole bunch. There's a lot of,
oh, to understand how this actually works, see the monster manual.
But the monster manual isn't out, so we have a product that we can't fully use yet until the monster manual comes out, and that was always going to be the case, but I thought it was worth mentioning because it did irk me in this particular instance, because the monster generation rules that we get in the DMG are not good enough. It is basically just reskin a monster. That is the whole advice. It is reskin a monster, here's a list of non-combat traits that you can add to it, and it won't affect its CR, which is appreciated. And then the only substantial change is that in 2014, if you added damage resistances or immunities to a monster, it bumped their CR. It bumped their effective AC or HP and increased their CR. That's no longer the case. The 2024 DMG says that you can add 1 or 2 damage resistances or immunities without impacting the CR. Hopefully, that means that we're going to get an expansion of that in the monster manual. If not, then the kind of framework for building monsters within 5th edition has been completely shattered, and we're going to have another couple years where we have just wildly weird monsters that are just all over the place in terms of their balance and their hitting power and their defenses, because no one will know how to build them. So if you made it to the end of this video, congratulations for sticking through all of my ranting. My closing thoughts on the revised 5th edition DMG. Overall, it is an improvement on the 2014 book. I think that's a very, very low bar though. Taking it on its own merit, there is a lot of stuff that I really like. It does have a lot of practical advice that new GMs specifically are going to really appreciate. My big bugbear with it is there are a lot of things that have been stripped out for the sake of simplicity that I don't think needed to be stripped out. There's still some fundamental issues with the underlying maths, some of which have gotten much worse in this version compared to 2014. And whilst this is great for new DMs, as soon as you want to get up to that kind of intermediate stage where you want to start making your own stuff and doing things a little bit more strange and esoteric, the book kind of falls apart in its advice for that. It gives you the sort of baby's first monster creation advice, but then nothing more. And I think we're still going to have a lot of GMs searching out resources online to answer a lot of these problems that could have been answered in this book. Hopefully some of them will be answered in the monster manual in the case of how to design a creature, but only time will tell. I'd really love to know what you think of the 2024 DMG down in the comments below. If you want to keep watching, check out my 2024 PHB review over here. But until next time, happy gaming.